Okay, we're here with Dean from Raspberry Games to talk about Vidar, or is it
Vidar?
Vidar?
People pronounce it differently.
Okay. All right, so first to start out, can you give me your elevator pitch, or what's the main idea of this game?
Sure. So Vidar is it's an RPG puzzler. It's focused on creating a random narrative. So it takes place in a town with 24 people. Every night, a random one of them is killed. They all have very interwoven lives and like codependencies. So when one person dies, everyone else's stories change, everyone's quests change. And because the order of deaths is totally random in the game, the story that you get and the quests that you get are different every time you play. So in order to stop the killings, you go into a puzzle dungeon. I kind of sell it as Zelda without the combat. So get from point A to point B, use the environment, solve like a puzzle in the room kind of thing. Those puzzles are also randomized, so that way if you want to see a new story, you haven't already memorized the solution to the puzzles that are kind of the challenging aspect of the game. And so play kind of goes back and forth between like as much time as you want in town and quick puzzle solving before people die. And yeah, it's an interesting exploration of kind of how a community comes together to mourn the loss of people in their own lives. So, yeah.
What was the catalyst for this idea? Was it from personal experience?
A lot of things, yeah. Definitely from the narrative point of view. I started working on this about a week after I had lost someone, a cousin who was close to me. He was much older and he lived like a full and amazing life, but I found a lot of similarities in our lives. Like, we had both started off in music. We had then both been lawyers, and there was just like a lot of like sympathies there. And going, and being a part of that funeral, and kind of looking at how a community kind of all came together for him was definitely something that I was personally working through. At the same time, I wanted to like really try to tackle like I had made hobby like RPGs in the past just for my own personal thing. I wanted to do another one, but I was looking at doing something smaller scope. I think a lot of RPGs tend to be very like, world-ending, cataclysmic, fight a demigod kind of thing, especially like in the JRPG genre. I had just played Papers, Please, for example, which is all about like a big story in the tiniest space. And I wanted to play with that idea too of how do I tell a much deeper but narrower story. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like most video games don't explore death that much, or sort of brush over the concept of loss.
Especially since death is like, you would be hard-pressed to find a game in this entire space where you don't have any kind of death. Like, even if it's like, you fall off the edge or something like that, it's something that we typically refer to as like, oops, you died. Or in the gaming community, oops, you died. And we get very desensitized to it, I think. Characters, even, characters that die, it's like there's only really like a dozen or so games that play with death and narrative, and everyone immediately comes to like Final Fantasy VII and stuff like that. And I wanted to see what that is more than that example.
Yeah, one of the most memorable moments to me actually in Final Fantasy VII is after, spoilers, Aerith's died.
If you don't know by now, like
where Cloud's saying something about she's never going to laugh again, she's never going to speak again.
Right.
And it seems like maybe you kind of took that concept and made it into its own game on its own.
Yeah.
Now, would you say that you seem very, at least art style-wise, inspired from 16-bit Square days? It reminds me a bit of Chrono Trigger or Secret of Mana.
Yeah, the art instruction that I had from my artist was like a memory of Final Fantasy VI. So not Final Fantasy VI exactly, because the golden era of like JRPGs was all intentionally very colorful and bright and drew you in. And for me, this is a more somber game. I needed more desaturated, and so what I was looking for was like kind of pulling from the back of your memory this idea of like nostalgia from a better time kind of thing. And that's almost like everything in the back of my head is like in sepia tones. So it was like a little more, like a little more muted and designed to look in that style, but not exactly from that era, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Is there any combat in the game at all?
There's no combat whatsoever. I originally started with combat in this. It was a much more traditional RPG when I was first kind of working it out. And I had the concept of, one person dying per night and everything. And what ended up happening was, like, if your blacksmith died on the first night, then, like, how would you get upgraded weapons? You could find them, but then it would cheapen her role, and it didn't really make sense for me. I played it with a lot of different variations on this until finally everyone just became quest givers instead of and got rid of combat, and it suddenly, like, snapped into place. And I think that it's ultimately better for it. But you'll see a lot of, like, the vestiges of a old RPG there. There is an innkeeper, there's a blacksmith, there's an alchemist, and that's not necessarily typical in every village, but it's, those characters were already, like, well defined by the time I was, like, down that road.
So you said this was a smaller game than the typical RPG. Are you just in one environment the whole game, or how big is it?
Yeah, so you're in one town the entire time. So there's no, like, world map situation. You say in one town, takes place in a month in winter, so it's not like there's different seasons or whatever. But the puzzle dungeon covers 4 different environments, and each one has at its core a different mechanic. So you have, like, an ice area, which is like Chips Challenge, Pokemon, sliding ice puzzles and stuff, and several others that each focus on different mechanics, but randomize them as you go through. And that gives it, because you don't want to just be looking at, like, the same thing the whole time, like the same tile set. So it gives it, like, that visual feel, and also, like, a new sense of exploration every time you find a new biome and you've, like, mastered the previous one. But I didn't. So it's the literal version, I guess, of, like, going deep instead of wide. Is that everything takes place, like, under this town.
What's interesting to me from a writing perspective, right, is typically writers get emotional when they kill off their characters. It seems like you're killing off all your characters.
Yeah.
How was that process for you?
So writing a lot of this dialogue, there were definitely moments like that I would set aside and be like, okay, I have to write, the scene, like the dialogue where the mother, like, loses her 7-year-old son, because that could happen, right, in the game. It may not, but it may. And those kinds of moments, I had to, like, pour myself a glass of wine, like, sit in a dark room, and, like, try to, like, channel a lot of that. And it was those were tough moments. But I think that it's an important lesson that, like, you can't just have a 15-hour game that, like, beats you over the head with depression, because I think that's ultimately actually kind of boring. And the way to highlight how sad it is to have moments of levity, like, sprinkled throughout. And I have a few characters that I could always come back to. Like, I have, like, a straight man, I have, like, a cowardly soldier, I have those kinds of roles that I could be like, all right, I'm going to find a little solace here right now and write their dialogue after, dealing with like, an abusive, like, husband and wife situation, or dealing with, like, some of those heavier moments, yeah.
How big is your team?
So it was 3 people that worked on this game. I worked with an artist. Her name is Becca Bear. She's a pixel artist out in Austin. She actually is doing Arcadian Atlas now, which is like a Final Fantasy Tactics style game. That's like her baby. And then I worked with a composer in Poland. His name is Adrian Jakubiak, who he did this, and then he took the portfolio, applied to CD Projekt Red, and then did, like, some of the work on, like, the last Witcher 3 expansion and, like, Gwent and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, I got him first.
That's awesome.
So they were both wonderful to work with. Entirely online. I've met Becca once. I've never met Adrian. So everything was done via, like, email, and then I did the development, the design, the writing, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
How long was the development process?
So it was 3 years, but for 2 of those years I was working full time. I was an attorney before this. I was in general commercial litigation. So, like, roughly, like, 60-hour weeks, and then I would, like, do this on nights and weekends kind of thing. So that went on for, like, 2 years, and then actually, like, I think a year ago this weekend, I quit my job, and I have been doing this full time since. So it was definitely, like, a leap of faith, but it's been good so far. So yeah.
And is the game released?
It is. It came out at the end of June. So recently released. It's on Steam. It's on Itch and Humble and Game Jolt and a few other places. It went through an early access period kind of the beginning of the year. I think maybe that was ultimately a mistake, honestly, but...
Why so?
I think that these days, at least with early access for Steam, unless you're driving your own traffic 100% of it, it's probably not worth it. Like, early access is a terrible way to get discovered. Just the way that like Steam, like kind of where they choose to show you, where they don't. People who see it, who's like, I've never heard of this Dean character. Why should they? I've never released a game before. I don't like, I'm gonna wait to see like this fully baked and stuff like that. You live and learn. You make, that's pretty easy. But it did early access from January to June, and then was released in June. Yep.
And where can people find out more information?
So vidarthegame.com. So VIDAR thegame.com. And I'm constantly posting it on Twitter and all this kind of stuff, and I'm at Raspberry Games, RAZBURY, because it's a combination of my last name, Razavi, my husband's last name is Canterbury. So,
yeah. And are there any other projects you're starting or working on now that you'd like to talk about?
I have almost finished the prototype for my next game, which I'm really excited about because it's such a departure from this. It will be a digital collectible card game, but entirely co-op. So instead, like my inability to get into things like Hearthstone and Gwent and like all those kinds of things is I'm not a competitive person by nature, and also I feel like it takes just a lot of ramp up to get to like a place where you could ever win a game. And it's too much, like, I don't have that time to invest, and so I wanted to explore other ways to approach that genre, which I really like, but just not the competitive aspect of it. So it'll be an exclusively, like, co-op or single player, but really, like, a co-op card game experience that I'm super excited about. It's called From Rust. I've announced, like, the title and stuff, From Rust, but hopefully going to start showing it off at a few playcrafting events and stuff around maybe January is the goal. So yeah.
Well, I already played a little bit of the game before. We got some footage. I'd love to dive more into it.
Definitely.
I'm looking forward to experiencing it more.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for stopping by. Hope you have a great time at Play NYC too.
Thank you.